Brogan, I know we're trapped in this dark void, this mind space between spaces, because we both ate the red pill and the blue pill at the same time after Pavlos destroyed the satellite of dreams.
That was a good recap. I like that recap.
But I think there's a way out. I see a light at the end of this tunnel. I see a luminous being, a tall, luminous being.
Hello. Hello, my children.
Oh my god, it's the David Punch.
Yes, everybody knows, of course.
Is this where you wound up after you stopped podcasting?
Yeah, I decided to take a little personal break and just travel the cosmos. And I happened to stumble across you guys here in the space between spaces, where I've also been stuck for a little while now. Can I get a lift, by the way?
Yeah, I mean, we can kind of figure the way out. You're very bright. What? No?
But David, this Cosmos thing, there's only room for 2 on this bus. I can call you like an Uber or something, but, well, you know what? How about we do the podcast and we'll see how it goes.
All right. Sounds good. This sounds like a fair way to pay my way.
David, I will say, since your retirement from the film podcasting world, you've been playing more video games.
I have. In fact, I kind of blame you for that, Brogan, because it all started last year when I was playing the mother games for your podcast here, for the podcast, and that kind of just reinvigorated things, and now I'm stuck in this, so thanks.
You're welcome. That's what the Daydream Cast does.
No, I'm very happy to be playing more games again, I say, as I have only a couple to talk about today. But
I understand you only have one game to talk about.
Yeah, 2. I mean, the game of the week, right? Anyway.
Okay.
I did play a lot more last year, to be fair. It's just, something happened.
But, also, the game you played is Balatro, by the way, which I have played and talked about previously. But I think the difference is when you play a game, you put hours into it. You put time and energy and effort into these things.
Yeah, you could say I get a little lost sometimes. It's sometimes like tunnel vision and get a bit obsessed with one or two things. I think I've talked about before when I come on the show. I usually have a game that I'm like playing through that's kind of more, completion, oriented. Like it's got a finality to it, and then I try to balance it with something on the side that's like just pick up and play, something that kind of helps between things. For a while. Oh, I was going to say for a while that was Splatoon, and now I'm doing this. I was playing a bit of Slay the Spire in the beginning of this year too, so I've kind of kicked off on a card-based roguelikes, thing lately. Again, I guess.
I guess the thing is like even with Slay the Spire, but also Balatro, there's a lot of like mastery and improvisation in these because they're largely roguelikes, and you're doing every new run. You pretty much have to strategize and master the game. You've played so much more Balatro than I have. I have probably completed 2 or 3 runs. Tell me, what is your experience like with it this far in?
Well, to be honest, the reason I'm actually here on the show is because I need an intervention. And that's the real reason I wanted to gather you guys, because I feel like this has become an addiction. It's kind of a bit of a problem how much Balatro I've been playing.
To set the scene and stage for you, dear listener, if you go on David's backlogged account titled Multiple Birds, very adorable, Balatro is currently sitting in his banner top 5 games of all time.
I mean, I feel like I had to put it there with just how much I've been playing it, which is essentially nonstop every day since it came out in February. It's actually kind of, a good time to come on and talk about it because they just today released the new patch for the games for the consoles. So all of the mechanics and card updates came out, and I got to try a little bit of that finally after watching a lot of people doing it. But
what is the addiction? Is it just playing the numbers? Is it just the probability high?
no, definitely not. And part of why I wanted to talk about it more here was it's not that Brogan didn't highlight all of the great characteristics of the game, but I just feel like there's even more to talk about, really. Like, there's a reason why this particular game has transfixed me even more than something like a Slay the Spire or, any other comparable title, which I also put a ton of time into. But I can't stop playing Balatro in particular because of a multitude of factors. Part of it is, like Brogan highlighted, the mastery of it, the getting the sense and the flow of it. I think part of what makes it so appealing is a lot easier to kind of pick up and convince yourself that it's going to be a quick game, because it feels like it goes by so quickly. The way that the rounds are designed, kind of make each one go by fast enough so that it feels like you could tell yourself that it's only going to take 10 minutes to go through 8 antes, and that's 3 hours later you're still playing.
And also, I don't know about you, but in my experience, you'll know, I don't know when, but like a couple rounds in, whether or not you've got like a real run. Like when you've got specific jokers lined up, or if you've got things and you're like, I can work with this, and then you're like, oh, I can really fucking push. Because there is some RNG in the shop of what you can get, and the update actually adds like a guaranteed Joker for round 1, like a Joker pack.
Yeah.
But there's like moments where you're like, oh, this fucking run's done, I have no hope. Or there's moments where you're like, oh no, I can fucking go all the way.
And I think there's a thrill to both, in the sense that if you've got something just entirely cracked, from Ante 1 starting, you're like, I want to see how far I can push this, how many jokers I could get that can synergize with this to really up the score into, like, the E's, if you're ever seeing, so you're doing, beyond the billions at that point in score. But also, if you are just struggling so hard and just, like, every round is a, survival, basically, like, that is his own thrill in his own way, and it really calls upon your cunning and understanding of the game, and knowing what cards to throw, what ones to hold on to try and get the hands you're looking for specific cards in your deck, the enhanced ones that are going to get you the extra points you need to scrape by that round and hopefully see another point scoring joker in the shop that's going to save you for another 2 antes or whatever. For me, really, I think a lot of the lasting appeal is the variety in it, in that it can be very different from game to game, but also that there's a certain amount of tailoring you can do. If you want, you can try and force a straight build, a lot of times. It won't always work out for you, but you can do it more than in other deck building games, like this I've found. But the most important thing, I think, that kind of really has hooked me into it is just the amount of character that the game has, put together, from the design of the various jokers, the atmosphere of just the UI in general, I think, is a kind of immaculate hypnosis that I can't detach myself from. It's got this very ethereal sense, and combining the psychedelic backgrounds and visuals kind of melding in with the green felt look of a poker table, alongside this kind of droning music that just, kind of lulls you into this constant feeling. It really feels like it's captured the ethos of, like, that casino kind of ideal, where, like, you just feel stuck between, space and time, and you're just kind of whiling away the hours looking at, card after card here and trying to get that next big win with no other sense of the outside world.
You really have been lost in the cosmos, damn.
I wasn't kidding.
You were not getting shit.
But I think what's brilliant about it, it does it in a way that entirely eliminates any kind of ideals of gambling from it. It entirely detaches those motifs and those mechanics from the game of poker here, while still capitalizing on the aesthetic values and the allure that has. So it's a really beautiful blend in terms of tapping into that established game and iconography for something completely new and fun and masterful, really.
I think it may help Murph visualize the appeal when we talk more about, like, say, specific Jokers, for instance.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
agree. I agree with, like, your statements about the hypnosis and stuff, but also, like, there's abstract Joker concepts that totally work. For instance, I think the first one that jumps to my mind is the Fibonacci Joker. The Fibonacci Joker has, like, it's like 8, 4, and 2. If you play those in your hands, you get bonuses for those numbers in particular. And it's shit like that sort of, like, adds in your mind different things. They all evoke separate personalities, and it all blends together to make something really, really cool.
I think the way I thought about it at first was, like, the Jokers to me reminded me of, I don't know if you remember it was one of the Futurama movies where they have the big poker game going on, and, like, Bender wins it all with, like, 5 kings, and one of them is like, oh, it's the king of the beers, the coaster from the the drink stand or whatever.
That's the 4th Futurama movie called Into the Wild Green Yonder.
Yes. But that's what you're doing is like you're putting that king into your deck, and then you planned it for that hand. Yeah, exactly.
And they really are, and they have that exact kind of sense of character where it's like, oh, it is like the king of coasters or whatever is like a potential Joker. Not literally in this case, but that's the spirit of the kind of ones you'll come across.
You start to feel that the cards have a personality.
Oh, they have so much personality. Like, and a lot of it comes from initially building around this image of the primary Joker, Jimbo, they call him, as he's kind of like the main face of the majority of the Joker cards, but then, like Brogan said, you've got some more abstract ones that you go out there and find to give you different ones.
And they also, I guess we need to emphasize, they're the main thing that shapes your build. So, for instance, things like, the Steel Joker or the King Joker or Jokers that increase depending on the suit. Things like this are what you're building the rest of your deck around, and that's how you strategize, and that personality is what defines the run.
Mm-hmm. And I think, as with many other things, where you kind of end up getting attached not just to the personality, but the ones you find that you like and synergize with. I like that you called out Fibonacci, because I think Fibonacci is one I was drawn to early, because it's like, oh, it's a very powerful one early on from cards that you get fairly common. But then there's also fun ones like the Wee Joker comes to mind, who's just like, it's a smaller Joker card.
The Weed Joker?
Wee, W-E-E.
Oh.
He's tiny. He's a little guy. And he just, like, builds chips. Like, he just gives you more and more chips every time you play a 2.
I think the Weed Joker would be all about those chips, too.
420. No, literally, a Weed Joker would be, like, if you have a 4, a 2, and, like, an ace, or, like, whatever would be equivalent to a 0. That's what that would be. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So, for me, part of it is, like, yeah, I've got to admit, like, I like the numbers. I would play a spreadsheet sometimes. Like, that's not beyond the realm of possibility of something that I would get a kick out of, just calculating the best way to put things together. But I can't just play a spreadsheet. Like, it's got to have that personality and hook and interest. And I think this is one of the best examples I've seen of that just finds, like, a really good, cohesive identity and stitches all together. And I'm super impressed with Local Thunk, the solo devs' approach to updating the game here. All of the balance changes are all really phenomenal. They're all, like, very positive. There's only a few where I'm like, oh, I mean, maybe that didn't need nerfing. But, like, very minorly there. And all of the, big changes that were made were very much, like, needed and improved the game significantly. I think I've had a couple of times with it, particularly in how the planets work, which is the leveling up of your hands, and how that interacts with the seals.
That was probably, I don't know if I would say the weakest. One of the nice things about doing Balatro is sometimes you'll think, these cards aren't that useful, and then like later on you'll be like, no, wait, these are really useful. I especially felt that with glass cards. I feel
Yeah.
like I feel like in your first runs, which feel different because you have less jokers to play with, but like you'll be like, why the fuck would I want to lose cards? But there's times where you're like, oh no, glass cards fucking slap.
Yeah, and that is one thing I'll point out as well, and I've said this to anyone who's just starting the game. It is much harder to win in the beginning than it is later on once you've unlocked everything. Some of the best jokers, and some of the ones you rely on the most for your high scoring are ones you got to unlock. Luckily, if you just want to jump straight in, the game does have a default unlock all, feature, so you can just get everything right off the bat. But there is a great joy, I think, in unlocking things. They're specified how you unlock them. There's like interesting ones where it's like, oh, have more than 30 hearts in your deck to get this one, or oh, you have to discard a royal flush to get this really powerful joker, and so they're all fairly attainable. Some of them were more interesting challenges, like beating the game, the last boss in only 12 rounds. That one was a tough one to pull off because you have to skip a lot, and that actually hurts you a lot more than you think. And then there's also, actually, to complement that, the challenges themselves, like actual, restricted runs where they give you specific jokers and they change the mechanics of it. Like, I think there was one where it's like, oh, you lose $1 every time you play a hand, or some where you just hurt. Like, I've completed all of them now except for the last one, which is the Jokerless challenge, which is a very interesting challenge, I think, to like try and beat it all without any jokers supplying you. It's possible, but like you think of it, like based on how you play the game, usually it feels like entirely unrealistic. But I got to the end once, and then I didn't draw what I needed. Rough.
That's the way the cards play.
Yeah.
You know what's another game that's about how life is never how you think it's going to be?
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
Gunbrella.
Oh, yeah.
This is a game I've been meaning to talk about for a while. I got it all the way back at the start of the year. It came out in September. I played it at PAX, which is why it was on my radar. This is published by Devolver Digital, and when you hear Devolver Digital and you hear Gunbrella, you think to yourself, oh, and it's a 2D pixel platformer. You think, oh, this is going to be some wacky thing, Gunbrella is deadly serious. This is a gritty noir in a dystopian Orwellian future where you play a woodsman whose family has been killed and your baby has been kidnapped to be sold to the rich people in the walled-off city, and you have to track down the man that stole your baby with a gun that is also an umbrella. Or maybe it's an umbrella that's also a gun. That is a mystery early in the game.
When Plato talks about, what makes a chair, what makes a gunbrella a gunbrella?
Very swift and snappy movement, actually. Right out the gate, this game is a dream to control. Your umbrella has two functions. You can open the umbrella and do a dash, and you can do a dash in any direction. You want to dash straight up, you can dash straight up. And then if you hold the button, you drift back down like Peach and Smash. Or you can shoot a shotgun blast where you have unlimited bullets. And so your dash is very generous. This is a screen-by-screen game. It doesn't scroll. So you can clear an entire screen in just one dash. That's how beefy these dashes are. So you're zipping around the screen. And also, a lot of the enemies are one-hit kills. So you're zipping around, you're getting in a guy's face, pulling the trigger, shotgunning them to death. Only when you shotgun them to death, they explode into chunks. Their blood seeps into the ground and stays there for the rest of the game.
I'm just curious, is this like a roguelike, or is this dedicated levels?
This is dedicated levels. So I wouldn't really call it a Metroidvania. Also, I should say up front, the game is short. Really short. You can beat this in 3 hours. Maybe 5 if you do some side quest stuff, but like when I hit credits, I was like very surprised, you know. Um, but it doesn't feel short. It feels pretty meaty and well paced, especially since there's like a mid act thing that happens that I won't spoil, but changes up the game entirely. Um, I think I'm not in love with the game though. It's got this Castlevania feel to it, like early NES Castlevania, where it's all about like that one hit kill, you know, that bop.
Mm-hmm.
But because you have that zippy movement, you're not playing it patient like Castlevania, you know? And so you kind of wind up running into damage, or at the very least I wind up running into damage a lot, and the healing system isn't ideal. There's healing consumables, but when your health is low, then your movement suffers. Like your character starts to limp, and their speed gets like halved, you know? Also, there's alternate fire modes for your Gunbrella. You can, like, give it rifle bullets to give it some range, or have it shoot saw blades. I never use those because they're consumable and, you know, you can miss with them, and they're really expensive, and honestly, the shotgun blast is going to deal more damage either way. The game also has some moral choices here and there. I shouldn't really call them moral choices. They're narrative choices. And often it's a choice between a short-term investment or a long-term investment. The first one you get is you raid this cult hideout and you find this gem. And there's a merchant out front who says, "Oh, give me that gem and I'll pay you $10,000 or whatever." But if you go down to the sewer level you were just in, there's a homeless man down there and he's like, "Oh, that's my gem. That's been in my family for generations. Please give it to me. I can't pay you right now, but I'll pay you back later." Right?
You know what this game
And eventually he does
like
pay you back later.
This game is sounding like Cave Story to me. Have you ever played Cave Story?
I have not.
Well, you can also use projectiles as a sort of flotation. Like, you could use it as a jetpack thing, shooting the things. And you can also, like, that is how the progression of Cave Story's alternative weapons are. It's either you can swap this one weapon now for a good one, or you can wait, 2 hours and swap it for a great one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the vibes are kind of what's selling the game. This is the year of indie games with vibes, you know? We'll talk about one later in the episode. Actually, two probably later in the episode. Because it really does, even though you're zipping around with this Gunbrella and you can do, like, the Scrooge McDuck bounce on your cane move, it does kind of sell this grounded, serious world where people are just dying left and right from, like, government negligence and stuff. There are some, like named characters in this plot die with pretty good frequency. And again, it's only 3 hours long. So a lot of those deaths surprisingly hit their impact, even though, like, 10 minutes later, you're going to see another one and another one. Just don't be prepared for, like, a payoff that's going to answer all the questions. In fact, it's one of those ones where you kind of end up questioning all the answers. But I think it's worth a look at.
Well, that's interesting. I'm probably going to play it before the end of the year. So I will probably have a follow-up episode. You know what I mean? But until that point, y'all, I got to talk about something with crows and countries. Did you have a better segue?
You know what's also black and expands? I don't know. The wings of a crow. Fuck.
That's a ooh. Guys, Crow Country is super, super fun. It is basically a Resident Evil alike, but it has a very unique aesthetic.
It looks like Resident Evil if it came out on the N64.
Yeah, it has a very roly-poly thing. I've compared it, and I've seen other people compare it to like Duplo early polygon stuff, or it's like like Final Fantasy VII when you see like the pre-rendered backgrounds, but then the very blocky, cartoony character models. So it's stuff like that, and the aesthetic is really, really charming. The monster designs are crazy awesome. I think they also lean into it's so hard to describe. I'm gonna cite fucking Five Nights at Freddy's, y'all. You know Springtrap. The thing about Springtrap.
Yeah, his name is William Afton.
Yes, thank you, Murph, for the
Matthew
lore.
Lillard.
The thing I was trying to cite here is there's a skeleton inside that character model, and that skeleton is very cartoony, but it's just grotesque enough to evoke some weird abstract horror that I think really works, and kind of I think Crow Country's enemy models play into this. The fundamental game is not very innovative, but it's solid and consistent. I think the environment is great. I think the enemies are great. I think the puzzles are great. You can play most of the game. I played almost the entire game with only a pistol. You can get other weapons, but they're often the side puzzles. I only got those later weapons near the end, and I beat the final boss with a pistol. The game is a little too easy in that context, but otherwise, I mean, I think the game is awesome. And the story, I was not expecting a good story, and I ended up walking away. There's some predictable twists and turns, but then there's some twists and turns you're like, oh, that's interesting. I don't think I've seen that, at least in a long time. Especially like how the monsters are and what they are. I think that was really, really cool.
So when you compare it to the original Resident Evil, does it have like the fixed camera perspective like those games?
I would say no. It's
Okay.
a movable camera. However, the environments do still evoke an almost pre-rendered aspect to them. They still look like that. And you have tank controls as an option if you use the D-pad. And sometimes the tank controls help. Sometimes they hurt. It really depends on the moment to moment.
But it feels designed for the tank controls.
It feels
like the
designed
devs
for the
know
tank
what
controls.
they're doing.
Yes, yeah. They were not thrown in. It really depends on how you're engaging in combat. Another good example of how cool combat is, and we talked about this way back in the Fatal Frame episode. One of my problems with Resident Evil is like, because of how the camera works and shit, you can kind of just like, oh, I walk into a room, I can't see the zombies, but I know they're fucking there. So I'm going to auto target, and I'm just going to fucking fire my pistol. And then at some point in time, I'm going to hear the death sound. And then I'm going to probably switch around and like, yeah, I killed the fucking thing. I don't care. Crow Country encourages you to make your shots count. And they also encourage you specifically to be as close as possible to the enemy, because the closer you are, the more damage you do. Even with your pistol shot. So you want to be close, but you also want to maneuver in a proper space. And the game is pretty easy up to a certain point, but near, I would say, the last quarter of the game, they throw in a lot of enemies, and they also throw in a lot of traps. And the traps encourage you to look in the environment. They encourage you to investigate the environment and not just quickly run by. You know, when you're playing Resident Evil or Silent Hill, you can sort of run by everything, and if you see something cool to pick up, you can pick it up. This game punishes you for that because you didn't look hard enough, and you're like, oh, you got something poisonous, now you're poisoned. Or, oh, you take extra hits of damage now. You know what I mean? So I think that there's a nice punishment system. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. I see this game is set in an amusement park, or at the very least there's an amusement park level. Is that fun? Because I love horror games set in, like, uncommon locations.
Yeah, if that's the case, you should also play Silent Hill 3. Silent Hill 3 is also, I would say, one of its primary influences. There is an amusement park section to Silent Hill 3. This game is entirely in an amusement park. Near the end of the game, it goes into a different direction. You know, when you play Resident Evil, there's like a mansion and then there's a lab. There's no lab, but it's sort of like a mining thing. And that ties into the plot. But yeah, largely speaking, you will be doing the things. You won't be doing roller coasters. There's not a lot of roller coaster elements, but otherwise there's a lot of themes. It's almost like walking in Disney World, and it's not so much you're doing, you know, rides. You're more so doing attractions, like you're going down Boardwalk or whatever. You know, I don't even know what that's called, but you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm. Let me ask you this. In terms of, like, the Resident Evil PS1 horror throwback, does this feel like something where they are trying to... How do I want to phrase this? You know how, like, Dragon's Dogma 2, we're going to keep bringing it up on the podcast until the Dragon's Dogma 1 episode? It kind of... It's a throwback to older dungeon crawlers, and therefore comes with, like, it doesn't try to correct those mechanics. Like, because it recognizes that those are part of what makes those games that genre. Does Crow Country do much the same, or is it really more using, like, the aesthetic or trying to correct some more frustrating mechanics from those Resident Evil 1 days?
I'd say a little bit of both. I think, for instance, there's no heavy inventory limits. Like, the only inventory limit is with a specific item, so you can't have, I think more than, say, 30 handgun bullets. But, like,
Can you
could
save
have
whenever?
Yeah, and you can't do that. You have to save at specific points, but it's not limited. In Resident Evil, you'd have limited saves. You don't have limited saves. It's just specific moments to save.
Okay.
That being said, I would say it's a little bit of both. I would say it doesn't further the genre. I think it's just a good outing in the genre. I think if you're a fan of the genre, it's a must play, but I don't think it, like, for instance, 2 years ago, Signalis came out. I would say Signalis is a much more interesting, in-depth, thought-provoking game. Signalis is a must-play for, in my opinion, anyone. And this game is much more, I don't want to say niche, but it doesn't do nearly as much. And I'm not blaming them. It's just what the kind of game it is. I would look forward to a sequel. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I definitely get that. Because with these throwback games, there's always that question of, like, is this just a throwback, or are you trying to evolve the genre here, right?
Yeah. I would say it barely. I think it involves the genre enough to where it's interesting to play. I think aesthetically is the biggest draw. You don't see games like this in terms of visuals. So I think that is probably the biggest aspect. But in terms of bare bones, I think they decided to not break what wasn't broken. You know what I mean?
We've chat about this, like, off podcast, like how the PS1 N64 aesthetic is really thriving in the indie scene right now, when I feel like a few years ago, those were all, like, widely regarded as, like, clunky, ugly graphics, but now people are really appreciating the artistry to a lot of those games and how they utilized limited polygons and assets like that.
I don't know if I've always felt this way. I want to say that I've always felt this way, though, and that I really liked the distinct, polygonal look of that era of games. And I think I remember discussing this elsewhere, and that, kind of going back to the conversation of preserving the jank of that era, I do think there is a value in that, a balance that we can strike between quality of life features and, the intended
The
design
crunchiness.
elements. Yeah. I think I've said somewhere else before that I love nothing more than being punished for not saving frequently in a game. Like, that is an intentional design thing, even back when it was the only choice, that was had between games. There was no auto saving. That's still something, I think, that a kind of punishment that can be rewarding, because it is, still on the initiative of you, the player, to make those, and it opens up opportunities for, like, experimentation in certain scenarios, like running into a fight and, playing it a little riskier, knowing that gonna go just outside of it, as opposed to auto saves, which can just go, like, literally, like, just in this exact same scenario again, as opposed to having a scenario where you can kind of approach it from a different angle, depending on the game, obviously.
Yeah, and I want to highlight here, when we talk about jank or the Nintendo 64 PS1 aesthetics, I think art direction is the middle ground, because I think there are some very ugly PS1 and 64 games, right? But, like,
no question.
we played, like, Vagrant Story 2 years ago. Vagrant Story looks fucking crazy for a PS1 game. Or Mega Man Legends. There's a lot of specific games with intended art direction. And I think I think independent developers have realized, with art direction, they can utilize these more limited resources to make something still special. You know what I mean? I think Crow Country is exactly that.
And I like my horror games very lo-fi in the graphics. I've said this before. Realistic horror games don't really do anything for me. I like when the graphic fidelity is low, because then it kind of feels like the game itself is haunted, It's that creepypasta feel. That's why Faith was, like, one of my favorite games of the last couple of years.
No, and especially with the monster designs, I really think they are cool, and they tap into very specific aspects that we haven't seen before in things. I think there are some generic elements to them, but I think with the art style companion, it works. Like for instance, there's I'm trying to think of the way to say this without. There's like baby enemies. They sort of look like Harlequin babies, and with that cartoony simple style, that's super effective. Or there's some enemies that wear masks, like amusement park masks, to pretend to be human or like try to simulate human elements. And I think that shit really works for the game. I love it.
Okay, it's on my list. It's definitely the last game in our Whatcha-Playin list is the indie game I decided to buy for this month. But I think it's been mentioned here and elsewhere that this is a very banger year for indie games. Last year was the year of triple A's. This is the year of the triple I. I forget who coined that phrase, but I kind of want to beat them up. You know what's another game with lo-fi graphics and unsettling atmosphere and an animal in the name? Animal Well.
Yes, Murph, I love Animal Well.
I kind of do too. I'm not like over the moon about it like some people are. I don't think it's going to be my game of the year, but it is a very good package.
It, you know, I think there's a little bit of overhype, and I think that naturally happens when a game comes out. But
I kind of liken it to, you know, when like a non MCU action movie comes out, like I don't like Matt Reeves' Batman, right? The Robert Pattinson Batman. And there's like the first week where people are like, "Oh my god, this is one of the greatest superhero movies ever made." And then like the snobs come in and are like, actually, this is a very standard action movie. You guys are just used to eating trash." I'm not like that dismissive about Animal Well, but I kind of feel like this is where I'd like the bar to be, you know, in terms of game quality and design. And I think it's where the bar often is. It's just Animal Well is really good about getting players to notice the tricks it does to get them to engage with the gameplay.
So, for someone who's been stuck in a Balatro-shaped hole for the past 3 or 4 months, can you like give me the context here of what this game is? I'm looking at a bit of it now, but I'd like to hear the sell on it.
okay, I will try to attempt this.
Okay. Just keep in mind, like, if you spoil literally anything, the people will come for you.
I think I can handle it. I think I can thread the needle here. It is a Metroidvania.
Okay, I'm getting that vibe.
That's it. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm sold. I'm sold.
Yeah, no. It is a Metroidvania where you're a small little creature and you're sort of in this. I don't want to say jungle environment, but you're in an environment with multiple animals.
Full of animals.
A well full of animals, and there's different biomes, and you're
Okay.
going to different areas, and you want to. The game communicates very little by text. It is mostly visuals
If
and
any.
like just innate understanding of like, okay, I eventually understand what I need to do. You have to collect. I guess I'm spoiling it. I shouldn't say that. You will get tools, and
Okay.
you'll get tools to access things. And what I like about it, and I think is the strongest element of the puzzle design, is that you will get a tool, and it's very non-linear. You could get a bunch of tools, you can pretty much get most of them immediately, and then you can go further in. But what's nice about going further into a biome with the item intended is you learn and you sort of experiment with what the tool is and can do, and you sort of ask yourself, oh, I wonder if I can do this with the tool, and it turns out yes you can, and the developer totally intended for it.
The strength of the tools is that they're very non-standard for the genre. Like, if you were to just see a list, it would probably get your mind going of, like, how do I use that? How do I use that? Like, think of the most, like, niche items in any Zelda game, right? The sand wand, the spinner, the ball and chain, most of these from Twilight Princess, you know. And then imagine if, like, those items could be used outside their respective dungeon in more than 2 spots.
I was going to say, key question when it comes to talking about it, is this Metroidvania more in the non-combat variety, like an Ori, or are these tools functional?
No, this is a puzzler first and foremost. Like there's combat, there's bosses, but it's like more in the vein of things are trying to kill you, and generally like one of the tools is like it's a puzzle, right? And one of the tools is how you get around that obstacle.
I'm liking the aesthetics from what I see. It's a nice, it looks like a pixel style here.
The aesthetics are very strong. The atmosphere, the music element, like how like you're in this like ruined environment and you can just hear things in the distance like chirping or cawing or howling, and it's like, ooh, what's that? And how a lot of the quote unquote animals, I don't know why I'm quoting, but yeah, a lot of the animals are sometimes just like for one screen, and it's something like, I don't consider this a spoiler. One of the screens, there's like a sloth or something in a tree, and it's just sitting there, and when you walk near it, it flicks a rock at you, or like a booger,
A booger.
And it's like,
I thought
that's
it was
not
a monkey
a puzzle
throwing
element.
poop.
Oh,
maybe.
Cool.
But
Okay.
that's not a puzzle element. That's just a thing you stumble across. Right?
So there's no poop in the puzzle elements.
No.
Not really. No, your character kind of looks like a little turd.
You know
Okay.
what I think? This is my personal lore speculation. I think the thing is a couch potato.
I can see that.
Yeah.
Wink.
Anyways, I think one of the things that's also really cool about it is, when we were talking about like this should be the bar, this is not crazy amazing. We played Myst, I want to say like a year ago, 2 years ago, and that was sort of like, oh my god, this is how puzzle games should be, right? This is organic. It's not so much.
The mystimalism is very, very high in this game. If you're the kind of person that like jacks off to YouTube essays about Mario 1-1 teaching you how to play the game, this is the game for you.
Oh yeah, and like what was. The synergy here is it's not so much here is literally a puzzle. There's no fucking sliding block puzzle. It's not the fucking Witness or some shit. It is it is much more like, with the tools I have, how do I get to here, or how does this thing function? And you're sort of piecing it together in your brain how the world works. And that is how Myst is, and that's how this game is. And that really works well in a Metroidvania, because Metroidvanias are meant to be cohesive worlds. And thus, the synergy really expands to something that I do think is special, but I agree, you're right. I don't think it's breaking molds. It just meets the mold.
Yeah, and I think I was riding pretty on like, I don't know, like a B tier as far as releases for the year that I've played so far. I think again, no spoilers, I think the ending area before you hit the first credits really bumps it up. That place is sinister as fuck.
Yeah.
And what it ends on, I think, is one of the most memorable like final boss encounters I've seen in a while. But then once you hit those credits, there's a second layer where it's like, hey, did you get all the collectibles? Did you get the collectibles for the collectibles? Did you investigate this one corner of the map that you couldn't figure out how to get into before? Maybe you should go back there with the knowledge you have now,
And it's also really rewarding. I love how like the Easter eggs are a thing that you do actively seek out and actively reward you. I was super happy when, these little side Easter eggs reward you with, I don't want to spoil it, but a very useful
extra
item.
Tools.
Extra tools. Or the tools don't even have to be something completely innovative. They could be something as simple as something for your map, which is completely useful in this game. This is a game where you
can
do
take
want to look
notes,
at
you can
that.
leave stamps.
Absolutely. And shit like that, again, ingratiates you into the world, immerses you into the world, and with the minimalism, it means that there's nothing there but the appeal,
Yeah, and I think that, like, as far as, like, a puzzle game, it's really not that difficult. I see some people on Twitter being like, oh, this is full of head-scratchers. I'm kind of breezing through the puzzles as soon as I encounter them, and oftentimes I'll find, like, a secret area and get an achievement, and then, like, check, like, where Steam says how many other players have gotten it. It's generally around, like, 25 to 50% of the player base are finding these secrets, like, at the same time.
No, the game's not shy about it. The game wants you to do these things too. I don't know. And the nice thing is there's also multiple ways to solve a puzzle. In that sense, it's a little bit more like a Breath of the Wild, where
sometimes it feels like you're breaking the game or like cheating the puzzle, but how you're cheating it is also like a puzzle in of itself, you know?
Yeah. Yep. No, I don't know if I come away with it like as an 8 out of 10. I think this may be a 9 out of 10 or something. I think this game is probably a must play for the year. I think if you
I definitely think of the releases we've gotten so far, this is definitely a must play.
Yeah. I agree. Do we think it's time for the Variety Minute?
I think it's time. Let's get real, y'all.
This week's Variety Minute is real life gimmicks and mechanics. I did not write a list for this. I have like some ideas, but Murph has a list.
Yeah, I have a list, and we're gonna kind of like experiment with what qualifies as a real life mechanic. This comes from Boktai, our game of the week, having the GBA cartridge had an actual solar sensor, and your mechanics in the game would change based on how much direct sunlight was hitting it. Right.
I think Nintendo, period, does a lot with this.
Yeah,
specifically with controllers and systems. Where like fucking 3DS, fucking Wii, the fucking Wii. Can I just say that?
Yeah, the Wii itself is kind of like the big one that stands out, but you can go back even further and look at like the Virtual Boy is one of like the first contenders here is that. Specifically.
I think David and I had the exact same thought when we brought this up, where we both said, "Oh, the Pokewalker."
Yeah, that was my exact first go-to thing, because when I thought of what the genesis of Boktai is, right? Like the whole principle of it is like to get kids out in the world, in the sun, to play video games, right? And the Pokewalker was like the other instant one I thought of that was kind of similar in that vein, where the whole concept behind the device is to get you out and moving. It's to incentivize that while also being a like part of your game.
Mm-hmm. My Pokewalker stopped working after I put it in the wash in one of my pockets.
That would
now
do
regrettably, it had at the time in it my Charizard from Fire Red I had been carrying through from generation to generation.
Ooh.
Now, luckily, there's a way you could have force recalled your Pokemon from the Pokewalker, so I did get my Charizard back. The Pokewalker no longer works.
I still have mine. I think it's attached to a hat, where I had a bunch of doodads hanging off the hat.
You do seem like a guy that would wear a hat that has doodads.
Yeah, I did for a while. I remember people using like techniques in like school of like attaching them to a ceiling fan or something to just like make the pedometer go way up. It was a way to get like a ton of steps in and stuff, ways of cheating the system and stuff. But I remember it as like a fun little thing to carry around for a while. It was a good gimmick. I felt successful. But in that same vein, I mean, Pokemon in general, I think kind of from the beginning is kind of predicated on real life gimmicks, right? Like the whole idea of trading with people is in itself a real life gimmick, is it not?
Yeah, so this is where we get fuzzy. Like, do multiplayer mechanics count as real life gimmicks?
I think trading in particular for Pokemon does, because it's
requires a peripheral.
Yeah,
or at the time,
Well, and it's intentionally meant to like it's tying the mechanics specifically to this external interaction. Specifically, as opposed to like a more traditional multiplayer experience where it's like you are both playing the video game at the same time, right? Like that's not what it's like. There is a real life interaction being,
especially since like in the
there.
early days when you you had to make the trades with a physical person rather than doing like Wonder Trade or IR. Like you had to actually make friends, right? In order to
that's the whole idea.
Your Pokedex.
Let me ask y'all: do you consider Do you consider the e-reader or amiibo part of this spectrum?
You know, Amiibo and e-reader, not really, not in the same way that like a Skylanders did, and Skylanders is on my list because the Amiibo are a bonus, right? Whereas other Toys to Life things are like that's implicit to the game design is swapping out, your heroes and stuff.
I mean, Amiibo, I think that everyone will tell you, was a cash grab first. That was entirely built like on the success of the Smash series, piggybacking off of that. That just ended up really latching on to this, collector sphere, and just it really took
They
off.
were video game statuettes that weren't Funko Pops.
Yeah, and they succeeded in that sense. I think there's more argument for them in that sense, particularly in how they were marketed. Horrendously, one might argue, in that you had to go to specific locations for a number of them. But they didn't tie that to any mechanics of the game, so I don't see that as a gimmick as much.
I'll appeal to another David game du jour, another Nintendo title, another DS title. David, how do you feel about stamping the map in Phantom Hourglass?
Stamping the map. That... Is that a real life gimmick? It is in a way. I do love that still. That in Phantom Hourglass, a game I would definitely come on here and talk about sometime.
How many times did you plumb the depths of the Ocean King's temple trying to figure out how to get the map stamp to work? Because I have a number that's greater than 1. It's greater than 2.
Yeah, that was, I think, by far one of the most frustrating puzzles in there. Is a hard roadblock for many, but also I love it because it's an incredible, capitalization on the unique equipment of the DS to do something interesting. And there's a couple other games. I think I talked about it when I was on here for the Twelve episode, where it also uses the sleep functionality of the DS and the microphone functionality and other things like that. But in the same vein of the DS, I think a more interesting real-life mechanic to me actually comes with the 3DS, which is the Street Pass feature.
Gotta be about that Street Pass. Did any games outside of the ones designed for Street Pass use Street Pass?
Yeah, I remember specifically, I can tell you that Fire Emblem Awakening does, in that
it does.
Yeah, it does.
Or did.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? No, it still does, I'm pretty sure, because Street Pass is still alive.
Okay.
Right? It still works. In fact, I brought my 3DS with me when I went to Japan to see how many people I was Street Pass with while I was in Tokyo and Osaka and in the airport. It was less than I thought, unfortunately. But yeah, I got a few places checked off on my map, and that made me happy. And, booting up those Street Pass games again, they're so much better than I remembered. They're actually worth, investing in and playing. I had a lot of good time with those, very basic games. In that same vein, on the 3DS, you also have, the IR games and stuff. Which are not as eminently playable as the Street Pass games, I will say.
No, but I'm not sure if AR, IR were fall under this banner so much. That's not so much a real life mechanic so much as mechanics in real life.
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
I would consider Pokemon Go part of this.
Yes, Pokemon Go was another one, obviously. That's another big one. And I guess you throw in Pikmin Bloom with that as well. And that it's the same spirit of, Boktai and the Pokewalker and stuff, where it's, about getting kids to play the video games outside.
Speaking of mobile games, how do you feel about waiting real time?
I was gonna say multiple things. First of all, I wanted to say one more big Nintendo one, which was WarioWare in general plays a lot with system mechanics, but WarioWare Twisted on the GBA is one of the best WarioWare games, and that has a built-in add-on thing for its game meant for the twist mechanic. This is one of the first times Nintendo played with gyro. And then, go ahead.
I was also going to point out Kirby Tilt and Tumble on the Game Boy.
And to go to what Murph just mentioned regarding time, system clock stuff is interesting and has been incorporated in a lot. I was going to highlight something that was non-Nintendo, but definitely tied to Boktai. Hideo Kojima did a lot of sort of real life stuff into these games. And a good one is system clock stuff. And a lot of times it's just small gimmicks. Like, for instance, in the end fight for Metal Gear Solid 3, you could wait 2 weeks or obviously fast forward your system clock, and the end would die because he's old. And stuff like
the
that.
end being the name of a character.
What? Yeah, the end is the name of a character.
Name of a character.
Yes. Yeah, the end is like an old guy. And
when they brought Metal Gear Solid 3 to the DS, the 3DS, the photo camo was how you broke the game. Because you could take a picture of any dark surface and immediately get 100% coverage in the dark.
That's so funny. That is so funny. No, but like it's stuff like that where I think Metal Gear Solid really like has these little elements, and obviously Hideo Kojima has a lot of influence on Boktai that we can get into later.
Do you want to talk about Psycho Mantis?
We can talk about Psycho. I think that's also super interesting, is like investigating different things on your computer or on your save data, Psycho Mantis, but we could also talk Doki Doki Literature Club, where you have to go into your files. Stuff like that is super fun to do. Also, what game did I play that had that? There's like a card game I played last year, same as the Unicorn game.
Inscription.
Yes, Inscription involves a boss battle where you have to delete a file on your computer, and the bigger the size, the more damage you do. So that's super fucking fun. And that is, there's stakes to that if you take it seriously. It was like, oh, if I delete something that's fucking multiple gigabytes, I will go far in this boss battle, but I'm also deleting something of tangible value to me, ?
Speaking of time passing, and still on the Nintendo train, surprisingly, have you guys ever cheated in Animal Crossing?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think I've done that before.
You've got that Mr. Rossetti warning?
Oh,
yeah.
He gets pissed.
How do you feel about when games do seasonal things like that? Like, oh, it's Christmas, so we're going to cover the map in snow now. A lot of MMOs do this, like seasonal content, right?
Yeah. No, I always enjoy that, but they usually don't base it on clock time. They usually just base it, especially like an MMO, they'll just base it on literally like the fucking time of the year. You know what I mean? They'll be like, oh yeah, we don't need to base it on
I think the reason I could never do an Animal Crossing is because it keeps track of how long you haven't been playing it, right? Like, I remember, like Brain Trainer on the DS, when you boot it up, the guy would be like, oh, it's been 39 days since you last trained your brain. I was wondering where you got to. And it's like, don't act like you know me.
Do you consider something like Wii Fit to be part of this?
Yeah, I think like peripherals, because I have here like Donkey Konga and things like that, where...
I mean, Wii Fit specifically is also like, here's how many calories you burn during this workout. So,
and then later Ring Fit Adventure
yes.
did much the same.
Yeah. No, and I mean, sometimes the peripherals are like, yeah, whatever, but DK bongos and Tonkai drums are like, to me, I think pretty reasonable. Same thing with like Dance Dance Revolution pads. I think these things are tangible. And
it goes away towards immersing yourself in the gameplay, right?
Oh yeah, like imagine playing Guitar Hero on a literal controller versus playing Guitar Hero on a guitar.
It definitely wouldn't be the same. I mean, some people still do like that way, but it would lose the spirit of it, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we feel about copy protection and game manuals being a factor to gameplay, particularly puzzles?
I think they are super cool. We played one, King's Quest 6. That has one where there's copy protection. There's also one that I personally love, which is Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, where obviously in the movie you have to choose the correct, like he chooses the grail that's like, oh, this is the cup of a carpenter. But in the game, each game was like individualized to where you have to solve a puzzle in your manual based on the information the game has generated, and then it gives you the correct cup. So to me, that is a fun puzzle.
I've been reading Dungeons and Desktops by Mac Barton and Shane Stacks. And it's a good read. It just covers like the history of computer RPGs and just like every RPG from like I'm going to say the 70s to the late 90s. Each one he's like, "Oh yeah, this came with like a 200-page manual that explains the world, all the major characters." Oftentimes when you like enter a room in a dungeon, it will say look at page 165 and that will contain the physical description for the room. And that makes it really hard to emulate a game like that because you don't have that physical manual with you.
I was going to say, there are games that play with this external element to them. Tunic is a great example. It's not a 500-page manual, but the game is about discovering how the game works and then utilizing a manual as a sort of back and forth. And the manual is in a different language. So you're sort of like, it's when you're like a kid and you can't read, but you're still looking at the pages and you're like, I'm absorbing information still.
Yeah, and I think, whenever I hear about people saying like, oh, older games, like they didn't hold your hand, like you were just dropped in and had to figure it out. It's like, I think you're forgetting the 200-page manual that these games came with, right? That helped explain and set you up for these sort of things. I know Star Tropics is on Nintendo Switch Online right now. That game very famously had a thing where, like, the last dungeon you couldn't get to until you put in a code. And the code was in your manual. It was a piece of paper you had to soak in water, and then it would reveal the code.
I think that's so cool, though.
That is. Yeah. It is super nifty.
One I remember was Professor Layton in the Curious Village. There's a puzzle where you have to fold a train ticket a particular way, and it was a train ticket that was in the game manual,
Stuff like that, I think copy protection is a prickly issue because I feel like preservation is important and piracy is good. But like that being said, I think these external elements also have a novelty to them and sort of experiment with the medium, so I can't
It's
complain.
more tactile when you're reading the lore in a physical book in your hands rather than scrolling through like a codex on your menu screen, right?
Yeah.
Especially because then you can you can rifle, you can just like open to a random page, it still functions as a book.
Yeah.
Something in that vein, have you guys ever played Keep Talking and Nobody Explodes?
No.
No.
Oh, wait, time out. Is that the one where someone has to defuse a bomb and the only way to do it is by another person explaining things with the manual?
Yes, one person plays the game, and the other person has a manual you print out. It's a pretty lengthy manual that explains, like, all the mechanisms on the bomb and how to defuse it, and they're not to look at the screen. That's like, the mechanic, is one person has all the answers, and one person has the visuals. So it's a game of telephone with being like, I've got something here with 4 blinking buttons, one's green, one's blue, and the person with the manual is like supposed to flip through the manual and be like, I think it's this mechanic, do this, right?
Yeah.
That seems like something that would have worked very well on like the Wii U, as an example.
Yeah, it's a real shame about the Wii U gamepad that never really got utilized. And I think the issue is that you could only ever have one, right? So it favored asymmetrical gameplay like Keep Talking Nobody Explodes, but you couldn't do something like, I don't know, Madden, where you're like hiding what plays you're picking from the opponent.
Yeah. I was going to say, this is kind of tangential, but definitely related to what we're talking about. You ever play the game called Screen Cheat? That one is
I love that game.
Very focused on the couch experience because you can't see your player, but you can see everyone else's. So the kind of perspective is you're screen cheating and looking at everybody else's screen to determine where you are, kind of. And that is super, super cool.
Mm-hmm.
I think multiplayer games experiment the most with those kind of specific spontaneous elements to them.
Yeah. I think, we're about to get an Elden Ring expansion in a couple months. So going back to an old discourse, bro, how do you feel about taking physical notes and drawing physical maps?
I am pro. I think there's limits to it. I think I broke my limit playing fucking Phantasy Star a couple years ago. But that being said, I think that it immerses you in a way that I think to many it's player hostile. They want to just connect with the game immediately. They don't want to waste time. But on the other end, it's sort of, I don't know, it feels natural. I mean, David, you played Metroid 2, and I don't think Metroid 2 has a map, right?
No, it does not.
Like you liked it, right?
I do. I love Metroid 2. I think Metroid 2 is phenomenal. Some days it's my favorite Metroid game.
Yeah.
And in part because I think despite not having a map, I think it's a lot more manageable than you think. Unlike, say, the original Metroid, which is a lot more maze-like. The advantage of Metroid 2 is that it's level-oriented. Like so you really only have to know one level at a time. It's a lot more manageable to either memorize or draw out. And there is... and I also have... I think it's also like a personal matter. Like, definitely some people will not enjoy the feeling of getting lost in the same way that I do, that I can. Like, I mean, just in this week's game, like, I think I mentioned to you guys, I got stuck on, like, a single part in Boktai for, like, an hour. And I didn't hate it. I was fine being stuck. And, like, I'm like, this is a puzzle I got to get myself out of. This is a maze that I gotta navigate, of my own making, so to speak, because I have no idea where I am.
And Murph cited Elden Ring, and I think that is a sticking point for me. I think that's where I start pushing back a little bit, because a lot of the Elden Ring notes are like NPC quests, where there's not a clear log, and you sort of it's vague. It's all vague, and because the game is so big, you're very not likely to see another character for hours at a time, so you have to remember them. Or you can just look them up on the internet. I think that's the ultimate problem, is that there's a base temptation to just look it up on the internet. It's such an easy way to do it, and I think it cheapens the experience, but also when a game pushes that hard, you're incentivized.
The player pushes back.
Yeah, the player pushes back. Fuck it,
I think the note-taking mechanics of games like is most successful when they give you some kind of tools in game, just as a comparison point for like the quest management. I think Majora's Mask does a really good job of giving you like a kind of detailed idea, a list and notes of who is going on what where. Yep. Or another example, we're talking about like drawing maps, going back to like Murph mentioned with Phantom Hourglass. There's like this one island where you literally have to draw the outline to figure out the shape of what the island is to solve the puzzle. And that's a really memorable one. And it evokes that feeling of like drawing your maps hand drawn, like with the original Zelda game, like, what you would have done back in the day.
I don't think taking notes work for a FromSoft game, because like when we're talking about these older dungeon crawlers, a lot of the quests are incredibly straightforward. It's, can you go to the mithril mines and retrieve me the cup of the gods? Whereas in FromSoft, an NPC will go like, so thou'st weren't present for the scrumping of Johannesburg?
And then you won't see them again for 8 hours, and then they're in a well.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, well, fuck.
Yeah, exactly.
This made no sense. And then someone explains it to you too, like, on a fucking video that's 2 hours long. And you're like, oh, I guess that fucking sucks. But again, you have to go to the internet for that. I think that's one of the core issues with that sort of system. And I think David is right, is that there's a middle point of, allowing the player to engage on their own and having a level of convenience. And the answer may just be have a map and being able to draw on the map.
Mm-hmm. I've got 3 more small ones on my list here. I want to bring up Until Dawn with the Keep Still segments. I think this was like a really... I don't think it succeeded in Until Dawn, and they kind of came up with better versions of that system down the line, but there are segments in Until Dawn where you have to keep still, where there's like a monster about and you have to keep your character still. This is the entire ending hour of the game. And you have to hold your PS4 controller as still as possible, and try to keep, like, it'll have an icon on the screen and you're trying to keep it in a bubble, right? And that's a good physical moment. And like the first time it happens, you think you're going to be a wise ass and just set it down, but the controller will vibrate and therefore you'll immediately lose like your place on the bubble. I think that's like a really clever idea for a horror game. Other like more indie games have started using the player's microphone as a mechanic, where if you're making noise, monsters will find you. Alien Isolation did this, and it's really cool to watch Alien Isolation streams because they're kind of conflicted between like, talking and making this an entertaining video, and drawing the alien to them.
Absolutely. And this goes back to the controller and how important controllers or how well things are utilized within a PC or whatever. And that's how they are able to interface, because the controller is ultimately how you interface with anything. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I think those are super awesome. And this again, Nintendo does it the best. Like looking at other things like the iToy, the cameras, I don't think Kinect ever really had anything
I have
great
an iToy.
I have an iToy as well, but the iToy games were never great.
No. Some would say they're terrible.
Yeah.
Like, quick aside, I know I said two more, but two other ones just occurred to me. Like, remember, like, the Nintendo Vitality sensor? That was, like, they hyped this up, like, you stick your finger to it, and it will track your pulse and make games around that. Like, that's a cool idea. I don't see many games supporting that, right? And then also remember Wonderbook?
No.
You don't remember when, like, Sony did, God, it was like a 30-minute segment on Wonderbook. It was their new, like, this was like the height of PS3 has no games. And Sony's like, and we have a new periphery where it's, you purchase, like, I don't even remember how this worked. You purchase a book and then have, like, an IR camera pointed at it, and it will, on the screen, like, cause things to appear and, like, act out the story. Wonderbook.
No, nothing. I got nothing.
Okay. Another a PS1 game that was cool, and I was always jealous of kids that had this on the playground when I was in preschool. Monster Rancher on the PS1.
Oh, dude, that's the one where it made monsters based on your discs, right?
Yeah, you would put in CDs, and it would scan it and give you, like, a random monster based on what it scanned from the CD. That was, like, so cool.
That is very cool.
Do you remember... Wait, this is a complete aside. Do you remember the fucking... I think they were, like,
barcode scanning monsters?
Yes. Where you scan the barcode, and it's like a Tamagotchi creature.
Yes, another one I always wanted. Things that had that level of interactivity were always so cool to me as a kid, because it's like... it's like a little adventure now. You have to quest out and scan barcodes at your grocery store.
Right. I mean, in a way, I think they're still really cool. Like, that's why I was interested in getting and playing Boktai, right?
Yeah.
Because I had only just discovered this, game series and, its kind of ethos. And I was like, that sounds like the coolest concept for a game ever. How do I do this? I
think the through line for a lot of these games, with like a few exceptions, is they can never be ported, without losing something huge to them. We're talking about like emulation with these massive manuals, or something like, real-time passing mechanics and things. These are things that can't be like replicated on other systems.
Yeah,
right.
You know what? Yeah, Murph, you are correct. That was part of the incentive for wanting to get Boktai, was the fact that it could not be ported. Yes.
Mm-hmm. And how much did it set you back?
Almost $100.
And retro games aren't cheap.
No, but it was about the same as a 1,000-Year Door was when I got it before they announced, and so I think I got the better deal this time.
Oh, I'm buying that remake.
Great. I'm so happy for you and everyone else.
Yeah. Are we ready to talk about the game of the week?
I think we are. I think we're there.
Do you have an intro set?
David can do the intro.
Oh, great. Okay, hold on then. Let me pull up some basic facts about the game.
Do not just read off Wikipedia.
I'm not going to, but I need to know some specific...
I just want y'all to know. This will be an... I have never, ever just copy-pasted
I'm not copying...
It's got that broken flavor.
I'm taking inspiration. Like, I need to know,
he's
like,
taking
when it
inspiration from Wikipedia. Oh, I wish I was back in university and could use that excuse.
All right. I've got it. Ready?
Yeah, go ahead.
This week's game of the week is Boktai, The Sun is in Your Hands. Developed by...
Okay.
I'm gonna go again. I wasn't telling you. You have something scripted out every week, and you're asking me to do this on the fly. I was not expecting this.
Do you want the bus out of the space between spaces or not?
You're right. All right. I'm gonna clutch up here. This week's game of the week is Boktai, The Sun is in Your Hands. Survival.
Were you about to say surreal?
No, I was gonna say survival. A stealth action game from Konami, notably produced by Hideo Kojima. The unique Game Boy Advance title relies on a built-in solar sensor on the GBA cartridge to play with various mechanics of the game, not limiting to the weapon that you use to hunt the undead, utilizing the sunlight from the real world into your game, as well as various puzzle mechanics that revolve around the use of light as well. Gentlemen, what did you think of Boktai? The Sun is in Your Hands.
Yo, if I had played this back in the day, I would have been all over this as a kid. This is a lot of my jam as far as GBA titles go.
Yeah, it's super nifty.
But it goes
a
beyond
lot of cool
nifty.
things.
It takes that extra step because you hear like, oh, it has a solar cartridge and your weapon in the game is charged by sunlight. And you kind of like, because you know video game gimmicks, you kind of think like, oh, that's where it begins and ends. But it's like, no, it does. It's not just that it does a lot with that. It does a lot outside of that, right?
I think what attracted me to about it at first was that they used this idea as a jumping off point for the kind of theme of the games as well, right? Like, so they're like, all right, so what is the story of a game that we have to utilize sunlight for? And it's like, well, maybe you utilize it as a vampire hunter, right? Like, that's the idea. And from there, you have a really cool premise for a game outside of its gimmick.
And it uses the scarcity of sunlight and says, hey, you know what also is like a thing about resource scarcity? Stealth games and survival horror. So let's do that. And it's kind of like one of the best Metal Gear experiences I've played.
I was gonna say, what shocked me, I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I thought that I glazed over. I think the sun aspect is really cool, but the moment-to-moment gameplay is what was like, oh shit, this is really cool, is the perspective, and then like it's a mix between Metal Gear Solid, but it's also a mix between dungeon crawling.
Absolutely.
Where you're going into a dungeon and you're solving different things or you're avoiding things, and in that it's really cool. And then like it has different elements that it plays with, the puzzles, and also like the fact that you have to drag a fucking coffin like from one end of the dungeon to the to like where you started basically, and finish a boss.
So a lot. We should be careful. Hideo Kojima is largely credited with this game, and he's like the producer and a bit of the driving force. But this was made almost entirely by Ukuya Nakamura. And I just want to like give credit where credit's due. I don't want to like Tim Burton's Nightmare Before Christmas
very much
this.
So. Let's not perpetuate the myth.
The coffin dragging really felt reminiscent of Death Stranding.
I mean, the coffin dragging is a literal reference to the 1960s Italian Western Django.
Oh.
Yeah, that's the whole idea. That's why the character is named Django as well.
He was named Murph. I don't know what version you were playing.
Well, that's the default name. That's the character name, Django. So yeah, that was like the whole idea with the Franco Nero character that most people are probably more familiar with the Quentin Tarantino taking inspiration from as well.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that is another cool, I think, inspiration that they tie in here with it. And because there is a kind of like westerny inspiration you kind of see there, but very clearly more the horror.
It definitely
side.
wants you to think about the ticking clock, and the coffin dragging is part of that. Like, what I love about this game is how it just starts. Like, I was thinking, like, oh, this is like some JRPG thing. It's going to start really front-loaded. But no, you just kind of, like, show up, and this little sunflower shows up, and he's like, oh, Tenko, you're here to avenge your father by killing the vampire that killed him. And, like, you're in it. You're in it, and it, like, when you walk into an area, it does, like, this cool little animation, and it will pop up the title of the area, and it will say how many hours till sundown you have. And that's a great, like, tone setter, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I did want to point out something there that you very quickly highlighted that I think is very easily, like, overlookable about the game, if that's a word, is that for a GBA game,
yes,
there's a surprising amount of voice
I was
acting.
going to lead into this because fuck the dungeon crawling, fuck the Metal Gear Solid aspect, fuck the solar sensor. What black magic did they do to get the GBA audio sounding that fucking clean? Like,
Tenko does not sound compressed.
zero compression. There are other characters that will just, like, talk or laugh, and it's the cleanest, crispest audio you have ever heard.
It is shocking for this system. It is amazing, and I don't know if it has to do with the custom cartridge as well. I mean, it can't, right? That I don't imagine that's a feature that they have. I don't know how.
I want a side-by-side of any audio clip from this game next to the ruby sapphire tinny horns. Right? Anyway.
Yeah, but I thought it was interesting that you said that you liked the intro, how it just kind of throws you right in, because it really is like, I mean, it gives you a little bit of backstory there about kind of the world and what's been happening, but it really is like oh yeah, Django, your father's just murdered, but the county's still weak. We just got to go after and get him now, and it just throws you right into the first. Do you think that's
a factor of they had to be conscious of wasting the player's time, because the player's time is a physical resource in this game?
Maybe. I don't know. I mean, personally, I found I was kind of the opposite of you on that. I would have liked a little bit more preamble to things, because I think if there's one thing that's kind of lacking in it, it's a bit more a kind of narrative fleshing out there.
Mm-hmm. It's very backloaded. But I think that's, again, I think that leans into the game design aspect. Whether or not your game, like, front loads you with lore stuff, I'm kind of like, depends on the context. Here, I think it works.
Yeah, it's not that important. I think part of me is, like, wants more because it's like I see, like, the potential of this world so much, and I just want, to really get into the nitty gritty of it. And there's just not as much to kind of pick apart, character narrative wise. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is also limited by just the very niche community that the kind of game has. If you try and look up much about the game, it's very hard to find, just because it's not a very accessible game to begin with. So even like guides and such, I had a hard time finding that at any given point. So if I got lost, I struggled a bit.
Yeah, but
which, like I said, in some ways I enjoyed.
It's very good at setting you into the mechanics, like, right off the bat. Like, it's like, okay, you can knock on walls like a Metal Gear Solid game to attract, like, enemies' attentions and lure them places. And, it really wants you to use that stealth, because you can just kind of run and gun it. Full disclosure, Bro and I played this emulated. And there's a patch you can apply to the emulator where you can manually adjust the sunlight levels. Now, I was a good honest boy and adjusted my sunlight levels based on what I saw at the window. Whether or not they would be accurate to what the sensor would read, I cannot say. But I will admit that when it got dark, I gave myself 0 sunlight, and suddenly it becomes a different game. It's like, oh, I have to conserve my sunlight unless I stumble across a sunbank somewhere, right?
And I will say the game is very good about giving you a lot of different sunlight resources, so that you do not have to play this game exclusively in the sunlight, or, you know, for anyone emulating, exclusively with like sunlight patched in. There were a lot of times, like if it was just going through a dungeon, I would do a lot of this inside. I think there was at one point where it was nice enough outside where I was able to hang out inside, and then when I ran out of sun, I could just hold up the Game Boy to the window, and I got enough light that I could just charge it up that way, just like for a minute.
Yeah, and I think like,
but there's a lot of,
you know,
there's a lot of resources that you have. Like there's certain items that you get that can replenish your sun meter. There are like stations in certain dungeons that have you know, refills that you can take from. There are the banks and the loan system. Did you guys interact with that at all?
I interacted with the banks a little bit, but then I gave up and I was like, no, let's just fucking throw in all my sun. I'm just gonna cheat. But in terms of the loan system, I think that loan system is really cool. It's sort of like a give and take. I like there being a risk and reward to not cheating the system, but you know what I mean?
I like that if you use the dark bank, they give you a card, and Otenko tells you, be careful how much you flex that plastic.
I ended up not interacting with those mechanics at all, surprisingly.
No, I think the game is generous enough if you have, like, pretty regular sunlight. It's not to say, this game released in Japan in July. It released in North America in the middle of September. Right.
That's rough.
Yeah.
Rough.
Also, the GBA wasn't known for being a very sun-friendly system with the screen, right?
No.
I wanted to highlight two things personally, and maybe this can also tie in with what David's about to say regarding the screen. I think even on the PC, the backgrounds were a little tough to tell with depth. Particularly with staircases.
I think that's just a factor of the isometric angle they went for. Generally, I was not a fan of games that took this particular angle where it's like hit up and left in order to actually go up, you know? It led to a lot of hand cramping, and this gave me very bad flashbacks.
Well, to take a comparison to actually a contemporary and also a not tie-in game, but Mega Man Battle Network also has a similar perspective and has environments where you can kind of see. I agree that in terms of like, pressing up and left, that is always awkward. But at the very least, I knew where I needed to go, or I could visually see things well. I think sometimes, especially at night, because it's a much more dungeony feel, the bricks or the rocks, things started to blend in.
I could definitely see myself as like a little tiny Murph when the stakes in the games felt so high, like you have to beat this here and now. Sitting outside, the sun beating down at you, you're squinting to try and make out the screen through the glare. Your hand is cramping up. The adults around you are admonishing you for playing video games when it's such a nice day outside. I could see this being a stressful experience if the stars aligned.
Oh, there were definitely some times of that happening. I remember in particular, I was playing like during a boss fight, you know, and like I was in the sun or whatever, but then like a cloud passed over, and all of a sudden like the sun meter just like entirely disappeared, and I'm like, oh shit, and I'm like, you know, in the middle of this combat, and I'm like, I gotta find a spot that has a little bit more direct sunlight. I gotta get out of this cloud.
Yeah. Let me ask you this.
Let
me ask you this, David. How much did the overheat mechanic pop up for you? Because on emulation, even adjusting the sunlight as I did, it never came up.
You know what? There was one time where it started yelling at me like it was gonna overheat, and this was at the very end of the game, and I'm like, I should go get into some shade. And I was like, hold on, no, I haven't experienced this yet. I want to know what's going to happen with the overheat. And it didn't actually overheat. I don't know what the parameters are, but I never had it overheat the entire time I was playing. You know, granted, the first few sessions I'd been playing, you know, like for a while, it was still kind of ugly outside, and I was making do with the smidges of, you know, light streaming through the Pacific Northwest clouds that we had for a while. But at the end, it's been beautiful lately. So when you know, in those last few sections, I was playing in, you know, beautiful sunlight out, but almost full meter, but never maximum.
Yeah.
It never got maximum for me.
Let's talk about, like, the amount of optional content this game has. Because technically this only has, like, 4, I think, 5, like, main areas. At the very least, areas that end with a boss. But then there's a lot of, like, side areas you can just wander off into. And what you mainly get out of those is parts for your gun that change up the type of shot you're doing, or give you a bigger battery, or give you a different elemental power.
I wanted to praise the guns
Yeah.
in this game really quick. I enjoyed the variety in how the guns functioned regarding whether or not you want to spin, or if you want little pellets, or whether or not it stuns. I liked how those mechanics fed into puzzle solving sometimes. Sometimes you want to stun a zombie and like literally push the zombie with your fucking pellets to use as a weight for your platform. Stuff like that I thought was really cool. So I was often changing and switching around to manage my gun, and I loved that.
The one thing I didn't get as much with the gun type was the lenses in particular.
The different elements.
They didn't always seem to like, and part of it is because of the UI and how it tells you. I think the one that came to mind in particular was the Luna lens, which is, it's like, its description in the game is, it's like, uses the power of the moon, but ... Yeah, and that's the whole description. It doesn't tell you what the downside of that is.
It feels like a flaw of, like, translation or localization. That's what I would put my money on.
That, or just the limit of the UI space, like you can only put so much text on there, but there was still probably better means. If I understand correctly, because again, resources are limited online, that particular lens doesn't use sunlight, like, at all. It doesn't use any of your meters, so you can do light puzzles and stuff, but it doesn't actually injure enemies. I think that was it. I don't know, though, because I have no way of confirming.
Yeah.
But there was a number of other ones that I just didn't necessarily understand their function. Some of them were more puzzle-oriented and obvious ones, like the elemental ones. Obviously, your fire and ice ones, they have different effects on the environment and enemies who are weak to it. But they didn't come into play that much for me. But I did enjoy, like Brogan pointed out, the various weapon types, and found certain situations calling for certain ones. So you've got, like, the main fan one, I think you rely on a lot, that has 2 modes that also fires. But then you also have, like, the sword style one, which is just like a longer beam. It feels like it has a more longer reach, but you have to be more accurate with your pointing. And the isometric style does make it so that the combat is kind of wonky. It's a little imprecise, but I think that is an intentional part to incentivize the stealth. Yeah, exactly. Yep. So it's not really a downside. But it does make some boss fights a little quirkier, I guess. Although many of the boss fights have these central, gimmicks or ideas that you're supposed to utilize to overcome them. So
some of them you could just brute force by chucking grenades. That's how I beat Camilla.
I ended up not doing that. I think because when I fought her originally, I ran out of light at one point. I didn't have enough. And so her whole bit is that, she shoots like these Medusa shots at you. But she sets up like a bunch of mirrors, which were like any good game, established in the dungeon previously, right? Yeah. Like that was a main gimmick of the dungeon. So she shoots those around, and you got to spin them to reflect back at her to do damage. And that's how I beat them both times. And that was fine. The one I enjoyed the most was, and there was a later one, was the Sabata fight. So like your dark half.
I was going to bring that up because that's where exploring the areas to get additional gun parts really feels rewarding. It's my favorite type of boss fight, where you're fighting someone who's on the same level as you, using the same kit as you, and it's a very Metal Gear inspired fight where it's like this stealth battle where you're both in this maze looking for each other. And it's like you can lure him somewhere and shoot him from behind for massive damage, and then he'll respond, It's a good give and take. The bosses, I think, are generally pretty good in this.
Yeah, I think so, too. I can't think of anyone that was really not good. I think the Golem one is maybe the least interesting, but it's not bad. It's just not very inspired.
Yeah, it's the very typical, he's going to charge at you, so position yourself into something that would be bad for him to charge into.
Yeah. I think one thing we do need to highlight, though, with the boss fights is the second half of the boss fights, because just getting through them is not the only thing you have to do.
Once you've dragged the coffin back, you gotta hit them with the pile driver.
And then you gotta, like, keep the fucking things, like, you basically have to keep I don't know what they're called, pylons or whatever. Solar chargers. You have to keep them up while it's, like, draining the boss's
And that's another thing
health.
where, like, Otenko will show up and be like, Otenko, be sure to, you're doing this when you have real good sunlight. Because if you don't, you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, so these were the main things that I needed to, like, wait for a good sunny day to do. If I would usually take a break after I got the coffin ready, and I would say, okay, because it requires a lot of your sunlight to maintain all of these things, because the boss's health won't drain unless all four are hitting him directly, and there's none of the black stuff sneaking towards the pile drivers. And then, of course, different attacks are thrown at you while you're having to manage all of this. I think it's another interesting twist, and they all are a little different while still being fundamentally the same.
I like
kind of fight.
It's not utilized as well as I would have liked it, but again, in the Camilla one for that, it's like, she's too smart for us. She's hiding in the coffin. She's not going to open it up until she thinks it's dark. So cover the sensor with your hand, and she'll think it's dark, and then blast her with the sunlight.
That was a mechanic I really liked as well, which came up in several other instances where it's not just that you need light. Sometimes you need not light.
The floating city with the wind was a good use of that.
Yeah. I didn't realize it at first when I got there, because I was playing inside when I first got there. I would try and do dungeons when it wasn't necessarily great out, just, because I had the time. But yeah, later on, because the wind will push you and you got to cover the solar sensor. And yeah, there was an interesting way of doing that. I kind of wonder how that would work on the original Game Boy Advance, because I was playing it on an SP, and because of where the cartridge inserts, it's kind of a fundamentally different experience for a number of ways. It was very easy for me to cover the sensor, because I could just literally just bring my thumb down and put it over it. But on the regular Advance, the horizontal guy, you'd probably have to put one of your pointer fingers behind, one you'd usually use for a trigger.
Yeah.
But another thing I thought was interesting when thinking about it is the difference in how you could probably hold it, like it was intended, the cartridge was intended to be held up because the sensor was on the back facing it, whereas on the SP, because of how it inserts, the sensor is facing you. Sometimes the top screen could block the sunlight on occasion, or my body even could, so I'd have to position myself a little differently to get the best sunlight.
That's what I was thinking about with, like, the comfort level of using this, right? Because in a way, you kind of need the sun to be, like, what, in front of you or directly above you?
Yeah. It's kind of interesting how much you could, because, like, it is very much like you could look outside and say it's really bright out, but, like, the sensor may not pick it up the same. If I recall right, the game originally came with a card, like a solar, sensing card, so that you could put it out in the sunlight and it would tell you if it's a good time to play Boktai, right? So that was one thing that came with it. What I bought was I got just the cartridge, but also the manual, which was a nice thing to come with it. But I didn't get anything else that came with the packaging.
I can't really... I don't know. Playing this game and, like, having to wait for good weather, I don't know if it would hold up if I had to do that, right? If it was like, oh, we're in the dead of winter, I have to wait 4 months until I can do the next dungeon in Boktai. I think that would I think it would lose a lot of luster that way. Maybe it would be something to look forward to. I just can't really imagine something like that.
I bought this game back in, like, late November or so, if I remember right, knowing that I was not going to be able to play it for many months. But I was looking forward to it. I was anticipating, the weather, because that it seemed like a nice treat to do with, like, the weather. Like, there was a sense of anticipation, and, like, I'm gonna have this great adventure to play once the weather kind of pairs nicely, because I think there is a space for video games when the weather is nice. Like, right? It's not now that the weather is nice, we're no longer playing games. Now we can go and do outside activities. That's
You grew up with a
I think one of
different
the great
family,
things
my
about it.
friend.
I know.
I think that's like the weird aspect of this is like it wants you to go outside, but in truth, going outside you should have better things to
It's
do
not
than
it's
play
not a
video
Pokey
games.
Walker
That
scenario
being,
where it's like we're gonna get you to exercise. It's like we're gonna get you outdoors and that's it.
that being said, I do think that there is something to be said about encouraging portability. I'm not gonna lie, I have a Switch Lite and it's handheld only, and I almost never take it anywhere. I play it in my home, and the portability encouraging you to go out and do things is, I think, the real special part versus so much the I am out in the sunlight when I could be enjoying touching
I mean, it is
grass.
a good package for parents because not only is it teaching your kid to go outside, but it's also teaching them basic math.
Yeah.
What did y'all think of the fucking puzzles?
I really
Less
liked
sunlight
them.
based than I thought they were gonna be.
Yeah, there was a lot of more traditional, like, block pushing puzzles. There was an ice section, some ice physics puzzles.
That you could
the math
cheese
puzzles
because you can do a
yeah.
diagonal.
Yeah. Let's see. What other kinds of puzzles did we have? Oh, I remember one that I was stuck on. Did you guys have trouble with that maze, the hedge one?
Oh, the
that you
hedge
had to
maze?
get the sum of?
You know
Yeah.
what? It took. I think it took 3 passes through that before I realized what it was trying to tell me. Like, oh, the maze is shaped like a particular number, right?
I had to look it up. So was it a different number for you? Then because it seemed like it was a generator. I don't know if it's a fixed puzzle or one that changes based on your file.
I think it's generated. I think.
What was your number?
6.
Yeah, it was different. Mine was an 8.
Oh.
So that's why I thought it was it. And I couldn't tell. Like I had to look this one up, but I'm giving the game a pass still because I think it's still a good designed puzzle. I think I just didn't get
The
it.
one I was stuck on in the... I think this is in the Vampire Satellite, which is a thing that's in this game.
Yep.
The think about it from a different point of view math puzzle was the one that got me, where it's like, hey, you ever think about how this number looks like this number from a certain point of view?
Yeah, I was stuck on that one for a bit, but I figured out that solution fairly quickly. Like this, and it's a logical evolution of those kind of puzzles where it's literally, you just have to look at this upside down.
Yeah.
Or like, if you think of an equation as being on equals on both sides,
Yeah, it's a lot
then
of
there's another
listeners, for those who haven't played it, like the puzzles are straight up, you'll walk into a room where it's a bunch of boxes with numbers and equation symbols on it, like pluses, minuses, divided bys, and you have to like puzzle out like, how do I get 6 to equal 7, right? By moving around those equations. Another real-life mechanic that this game uses that we touched on in the Variety Minute is the passage of time for growing crops. Honestly, I didn't use the solar fruit that much.
They throw a ton of items at you throughout the game. Maybe it was because I was going into a lot of dungeons, and I was, opening every chest I saw, but I had a ton of the speed fruits, the regular apples.
I like the speed fruits. I like how motion is like something that matters. Also, like the little black orbs slow you down. And you have to like move. You have to like shake them off. I like those elements. I think that's super fun.
Yeah. The speed fruit definitely was clutch for a number of those boss fights, I felt. Especially the coffin ones, like we talked about. It made getting around to each one and, getting rid of the black stuff on it a lot easier once I figured out that those were good to use. Again, the problem is usually when I'm so stingy with items, but they really throw enough at you that I felt okay using a good amount of them throughout.
Yeah.
The growing mechanic is nice in theory, but
It's just,
I don't know that you
I think it ties back to that factor of the item descriptions aren't useful in a lot of circumstances. So there's a mechanic, listeners, where you get a garden, and you can plant 2 fruits together, and you'll make a new fruit. The issue is that the fruits kind of grow in real time, and how fast they grow depends on how much sunlight they're getting. So every now and again, you'll like leave a dungeon, and it'll be like, the solar tree is calling, and you have to go back to the solar tree. And I'll just say it, kind of wish this game had an overworld map.
Yeah, the map is probably the biggest contentious point for me. It is hard to navigate.
At the very least, it's useful that if you're going up, you're generally going towards the objective. If you're going back, you're generally going towards, down. If you're generally going towards the solar tree.
Yeah, there's one point where it tells you to go to a specific location, and I could not figure it out because, like, you can't interact with the map at all, and it doesn't tell you what the various dungeon names are. Thankfully, like, once you clear a dungeon, you can just, like, teleport through it. You don't have to walk through the dungeons every single time. That would be a nightmare. But it took me a good while of going into every single place that I'd already cleared and trying to find this new spot. I couldn't tell, like, where exactly I was meant to be going. I did eventually find it, though. But
yeah. And I like the little traps or challenge segments at the end of the dungeons, because it was a nice shake-up for the gameplay, where you can't beat the dungeon until you've done a particular thing, like defeat all these enemies without getting spotted, or defeat them all in one blast, or something like that. I found those really entertaining, and sometimes I kind of wished that the game was just like just built around those encounters. Because I did find a lot of, like, the quote-unquote stealth gameplay, a little give or take. A lot of it I could just brute force by running through.
You could. There's a grading system for, like, all of the stealth sections, but, like, in a lot of cases where they have those, I don't feel any way about
grading
it. I'm
systems
like,
matter more to me when the segments are replayable, right? Where it's like a neon white or a roller drome. Something like this, where it's grading me, it just washes off me because it's like, who's gonna know?
Yeah, I don't care. I got through it.
Yeah.
What else do you want?
I don't agree with that, but this is fine.
No,
I mean, I get it in this one because it's like, whatever. No, but it's more like Metal Gear Solid, and like when you play Metal Gear Solid, you kind of do, because like that doesn't go segment by segment, dungeon by dungeon. That goes for a total game. Like in your total game, like how many people did you kill? How many times has there been alerts? Things like that matter in like stuff like that.
It gives you the total here as well at the end, but again, like it just feels so inconsequential, you know, because it really just feels like whatever you got to do to get to the end. It's, you know. The stealth it is an important element of it, and you do want to play into it a lot of the time. But like Murph said, there are plenty of times you can brute force it and just run past enemies, tank damage.
I was gonna say, like, I think the real thing about the stealth here is like in a Metal Gear Solid or any stealth game really, is that when there is an alert and they see you and there's aggro, you should be scared. And like, combat in here is clunky, but most of the time you can avoid. Yeah, like it's not scary. It's not like oh shit, this is unrecoverable. No. The scramble is kind of fun.
The scramble only comes in the factor of the dwindling resource of your sunlight. Like I said, in those moments where I had my sun meter all the way down to 0 because it was night out, I did feel that strain, and I was using more stealth mechanics like knocking on walls, luring enemies, distracting them.
And all that's really good still, I think. I enjoy that.
Yeah. One factor, like, the bosses are good. I kind of wish the dungeon designs were better, or at the very least they used more distinct tile sets. Because they use this isometric grid view, it's a lot of, like, it's built out of blocks, right? And that just kind of leaves a lot of areas feeling uninspired, and kind of contributes to why I wish I had a map, because a lot of the rooms individually are not memorable, right? Especially for the side dungeons. Yeah.
I think the puzzles are often more memorable than the rooms. So, like, if the rooms are memorable, it's because of the puzzle that you encountered there versus the layout of any given dungeon. There are, like, secrets, like, you can go back and explore. One of, I think, the interesting things that's probably not capitalized on is the duality of the fire-ice dungeons.
Yeah. It's mainly just the fire dungeon.
Well, if I'm correct about this, it looks like you can approach either one and do it. Like, I don't know.
I did ice first, and then the ice wolf freezes the pile driver, so you have to go to the fire dungeon and get the fire sword.
Okay, so that is the case. So I did the fire dungeon first.
Mm-hmm.
So that's cool. I like that there's a little bit of non-linearity there. But what that means is that there's some secret paths and stuff in their dungeon that are unlocked by getting the corresponding weapon type from the end of the other.
The very first dungeon is actually, like, I feel the most expansive, because you go back, the first time through there, you're going to come across a lot of dead ends. And it'll be like, here's an ice block in your way, here's a block in your way. And you come back with your other equipment and be like, oh, I can uncover more areas to this here. The reward is generally like, oh, here's some rare fruit, or here's a bigger battery, right?
That's the thing, is ultimately I'm not too incentivized to go back through these dungeons and figure out those other puzzles. It's really in the side dungeons and optional ones where there's stuff. Did you get the what's it called? Like, it was the javelin weapon?
Yeah, that was my main weapon.
Yeah, I got that too. So I had read somewhere that it was perhaps intended for it's like a post-game thing, like, but you can get it beforehand. But if you do, it triggers a trap.
The trap did not trigger for me. I'll say that.
Oh, that's odd. Okay, so
the area, the whole thing is kind of odd, because the area is quite literally off the beaten path. Everywhere else in the game, you can't go off the path, except for this, like, one little trail off to the left in one screen.
Yeah.
And it goes into this area where it's like, hey, if you go forward, you're gonna die, right?
Yeah.
But the dungeon is actually really easy, and you get a really powerful gun model for it. And I read that there's supposed to be a trap that triggers, that, like, lowers your sunlight or something.
Yeah, so it entirely took away my ability to use sunlight.
Oh, and you have to, like, turn on the game at, like, exactly midnight or something like that, right?
You have to go back to the solar tree right when sunrise is going to happen.
Oof.
And so you could cheese it, fortunately, because the game has, an internal means of adjusting the clock. But
what does it qualify as sunrise? Does it tell you?
So sunrise is indicated, like, and it'll instructs you on this as well. Like, it'll tell you, like, in the menu, you can go in and see, like, by hitting, like, the select button, I think it is, on the item menu, it will tell you when sunrise will happen.
Okay.
But so you can change the time in the clock, but it was a weird thing for my game. I don't know if it has something to do with the particular cartridge I have, but every time I'd boot up the game, it would start again at midnight. Like, it didn't save whatever the time was and kind of continue that. Like, an internal clock, it didn't possess an internal clock, and I have no idea why. But so that meant that every time I booted up the game, it was dark, and so if I wanted it during daytime, I had to manually change that. Which for some puzzles you had to. There was one puzzle I remember I was kind of struggling with a while, where it was like you had to enter a passcode, and it tells you the passcode at the beginning of the floor.
Yes.
In the last dungeons. And by the time you get to the top, it's different, and it's because the passcode is the current time.
Oh, okay.
Did you not? Did you just, like, brute force it and figure it out?
No, I may be thinking of a different puzzle.
Oh, okay, yeah. I think this was in the last dungeon, if I remember right.
Okay, I definitely remember, like, repeating to myself a passcode, and then getting to it. Okay, yeah.
You must have gotten into it and gotten to there in less than a minute then, or something.
Maybe
but
I'm
yeah,
just too pro.
that was it. But yeah, so secret weapon. You get the secret weapon, the javelin. You get cursed and you can't have any sunlight. You got to go. Oh, the other hang up with it is you can't use the item to teleport you back to the
come on
tree.
now.
Yeah. No, it was not great. I didn't love it, honestly, and particularly given that, like, the whole sunrise thing, like, it's literal. Like, you have to wait till the sun comes up. And even though that you can just adjust the time and make it happen, like, again, it's one of those things where in theory it sounds cool. In practice, it's just really obnoxious.
Yeah. I think the most surprising thing about the game overall is it really didn't have that many of the obnoxious moments that I was expecting. Right. There's like...
Not especially.
There's a few spots. The fact that I think it's in the Sky Dungeon, where you have to use the mushroom to shrink yourself to walk through, like, vents.
Yeah.
The fact that the mushrooms are consumables, and if you, like... And it's, like, one use to go one way. So if you want to go back to the room you were just in, you have to use another mushroom, and therefore you kind of have to farm them. I could see that getting sticky and soft locking the player.
Yeah, they do give you
They
mushrooms
do give you a
generally
lot
in
of
every
mushrooms,
room.
but by the end, I think I was down to like 2, and that's on me because I was like backtracking into certain rooms again because I got lost.
But it definitely discourages you from, kind of going in and out and exploring a lot of spaces. I agree. It's not generally a good way to design your puzzle.
Especially for a game that's so time sensitive when you're playing.
Yeah. And also another item that does not tell you what it does explicitly.
Yes. But I think just overall, if we're nearing like the end of like talking points, I think this is a really unique special package, and it kind of breaks my heart a little that it's just trapped because there's not really a way you can replicate this, right? Like this isn't getting a Switch port.
I mean, definitely not. But in a way, like, that's also what makes it so special, right? It was, of its time, of its, hardware in this very unique way. And so even trying to, like, adapt it or port it in any way would, inevitably take away from that. And so really, like, the best way is to continue to preserve them, physically in some means.
And I think it just hurts whenever, like, a game... people are going to know more about it from, like, a listicle that's, like, 7 unique games that you've never heard of, rather than, like, something that they can experience for themselves.
I mean, and I guess that's something to touch on, too. I only knew about the game because of the crossover it had with the Mega Man Battle Network series. So when...
That was my first exposure to the series.
I'm sure that was a lot of ours, honestly, a lot of people's. The series did not do... terribly well over here. Like, they didn't even localize the third game in the series.
This feels 100% like something that Sakurai would have really loved enough to force in a assist trophy of Django into Smash Ultimate.
Oh, that would have been very cool. I would have loved that.
That's the energy this game has.
It was such a good experience that I'm interested enough to potentially invest in another cartridge for the second game.
I would be interested to hear how
I was going to say, what do we know about the sequel?
So I'll tell you this about the sequel, one thing I know. Django loses the solar gun.
Okay.
So what happens?
I don't know what that means mechanically.
Was the gun inside him all along?
I know that he uses various melee weapons instead, from my little bit of reading that I've been able to do, but
it still uses
it does.
the sun
It does. Right? I don't know to what extent. I'm very curious, though.
Interesting. I did like the bit towards the end where Master Otanko's like, yeah, I died there, but this isn't my physical body. What were you worrying about?
I'm just a, interpretation of the literal sun.
It was... I do want to know, like, the very last bit of gameplay where it's like, Otanko's like, I'm dying, and you have to charge the sun up to save him. Can you fail that by not pressing the button or not having the sunlight required? Do you get, like, the bad ending?
I don't know. Because, I set myself up, out in like, a nice field for the ending. Like, I knew I was coming up on it. I was like, this is going to be, like, a special deal, so I'm going to find a nice spot to hold up while I finish the game here. And that was a nice thing for it. I felt that was very a nice way to kind of cap off the experience there.
Yeah. It also just ends.
Yeah, it does. It really does. And again, kind of like in the same way that it just starts. And so in some ways, the game leaves me wanting a little more on a narrative standpoint, but it has such a kind of strong, foundation for that in terms of character, even though Django is like just your kind of typical silent protagonist. There's enough in the very principled design aspects, and again the whole idea of the setting and the world that you really want to invest in it, and you kind of buy how
really
it ties
only
in.
Hinted at, like you get the text scroll at the beginning that says like the vampires won and rule the world, and you're trying to you're part of the rebellion, the one-man rebellion.
Right. It's just enough, and the fact that it's married so beautifully with the sunlight mechanics of the game just tells me how much of a success that this really was. And again, like it's a game that's so much more than its gimmick.
Mm-hmm.
It used that as a jumping off point, but it really is a fully fleshed, interesting, unique game, you know, all on its own outside of those gimmicks, but it uses them so beautifully to accent the gameplay rather than to sell it, if you know what I mean.
Well said, well said. Well, you know, David, I think you did pretty well on your performance review here. Bro and I are going to let you onto the bus. Just one thing, obviously, since you are an expert in light and illumination, before we go, could you go to the hardware store and get us a bulb wrench and some headlighter fluid?
Bulb wrench
and a left-handed screwdriver.
Left-handed screwdriver. All right, got it.
Yeah. So
all coming up,
and we'll be right here when you get back.
All right, I'm on it, you guys. Thanks so much for helping get me out of here. The space in between.
Well, before you go on your journey, while we patiently wait here and definitely not abandon you, are there any plugs?
Yes, actually, I do. I would like to plug your dentist. Everyone out there listening, I know it's been a while. You've been putting off that appointment. What? You should really go and see your dentist. What? Get a cleaning.
He just activated really my fight or flight. What is this?
David's advocating for me to see my father, and I'm not appreciative of this.
Brogan, you're Willy Wonka?
Yes, I am.
Wow.
There's some deep lore on this episode. Thank you so much, David. Murph, do we have any plugs?
You know, we're just really cool guys. So if you've listened to this episode and you haven't subscribed to the Daydreamcast, do that. Unsubscribe, resubscribe. You know, and leave a comment, leave a like. Go do that on all of our other episodes. You can even do it on the ones I'm not on. And you know what? Also, go subscribe to the Backlog Banter. Get those boys up to 400.
Okay.
Yeah.
Subscribe to the Crawl. Subscribe to Stacks. We got things to promote.
We have friends. We're part of a network.
I should probably plug my partner's show. I think that's probably important.
Oh, yeah.
Go ahead and subscribe and listen to This Podcast Is a Bad Idea.
That's a very good show. Both the hosts are very pretty.
Well, I'm not a huge fan of Fru's co-host.
I agree. I mean, you know, he's okay. He gets the job done. You need someone, right? You need a co-host.
Where's that bulb wrench, David?
on it. I'll get right on that. Don't worry.
Okay, bro.
All right, thanks for having me, guys.
All right.